everyone. Welcome to a new Getting to Know Japan webinar. Thank you for joining us. And also thank you to our sponsor, Japan Foundation New York, for funding this series and enabling us to put this on each week. Today, we're joined by Professor Michael Cucek, who will be presenting on Japan's political landscape. Michael Cucek is a good friend of YCAP's, and he's joining us from Temple University Japan campus, where he's an assistant professor of Asian Studies. He's a fellow at Temple University Japan's Institute of Contemporary Japanese Studies and a senior advisor for consultancy Langley Esquire. Prior to joining Temple University Japan, he held academic positions at Waseda University and Sophia University. For 15 years, he was senior research analyst at Okamoto Associates, a strategic and business consulting firm. Before that, he was a research associate at the Asahi National Broadcast Company. Professor Cucek's specializations include the history of China and Japan, Japanese politics, U.S. relations with Northeast and Southeast Asia, international politics, and the history of racism. Professor Cucek, it's a pleasure to have you with us today, so I'll let you take it over from here.
Okay, I hope everyone can hear me, and I hope I've not muted myself in all this going back and forth. But good evening, everyone. I will be speaking actually quite briefly. Some people have listened to me do Japanese history lectures, and I tend to get overwhelmed by my own slides. In this case, this is an amazing group of individuals who have gathered here this evening, and I would really like to hear what other people have to say, and I'd like to hear their questions. This is particularly true because it was quite memorable last year in one of these seminars that I participated in. A person asked the great expert in the relations between religion and Japanese politics, Larry McLaughlin, just a question out of the blue: what about the Unification Church? How's that affecting Japanese politics? And unfortunately for Professor McLaughlin, he said, well, it has a lot of ties, but I don't think it's really that. He didn't think it was that important. And 1 week later, Prime Minister Abe is assassinated by an assassin who has a grudge because his family was injured by the Unification Church. So my guess is that somewhere out there is a question for me that about something I should be paying attention to. And that I should know about and think about more seriously. So I'm looking forward to hearing from everyone and not dominating the conversation the way I normally do. That being said, I just have a few slides I want to share regarding the unified local elections that are happening right now. We had the first round last weekend on Sunday, and we have some results from that. And then we have upcoming on the 23rd, the second round. So with that, I'm going to share screen and start on the very, very, very few slides that I have for today. All right. So it'll eventually disappear. As I said, over the weekend, we had the first of two rounds of local elections. And this is a celebration of a successful candidate, in this case, in Aomori Prefecture. I have as subjects for this evening, first, what are the unified local elections and why should anyone care about them? If they're local, why they don't really affect matters, but I think that they are quite significant, and they have some very interesting aspects, and they say some very interesting things about Japanese politics in general, particularly the health of Japanese politics. Concurrent with the local elections, there are 4 Diet seats, 4 House of Representative seats that are going to be filled in by-elections. And these 4 contests are seen as a test of the leadership and the electoral viability of Prime Minister Kishida himself. Someone is marking my slide. Thank you. Then the question that'll come out of these by-elections, which are elections in between the regular elections, are they going to trigger inside Prime Minister Kishida's mind a desire to go to the emperor and say, Emperor, this House of Representatives is no good. We need a general election. And the emperor will say, yes, Mr. Prime Minister, I will dissolve the Diet. And we would have a House of Representatives election very soon. And this is what the scuttlebutt is, the general wisdom regarding these by-elections that are coming up in a very short amount of time. And then in terms of what could be election issues, or just what are issues right now that are most pressing, the two that are really obsessing the political classes right now are Japan's precipitous population drops, which were documented by figures that came out yesterday, showing that the population of Japanese in Japan fell by 750,000 people last year. That Japan's population decline is more precipitous than most scenarios had imagined. At the same time, despite its falling population, Japan is raising its profile in terms of its defense spending, in that it's going to raise defense spending in the current budget that just passed by 20%. There are, and I'd love to discuss that with people, not just the rise itself, but how it's going to be funded. But first, let me just talk about the unified local elections. What are they? They were established under the aegis of the United States occupation to try to give to local areas more autonomy. Before 1945, local politics was largely under the thumb of the Home Ministry. It was under central government control. Americans came in and said, we need more democracy, and one thing we need is to have local assemblies, local mayors, and prefectural assemblies and governorships all decided on the day, and that local administration would have an election day where the people would get to choose their immediate leaders. Prior to 1945, mayors were appointed by the assemblies, the city assemblies, and prefectural governors were appointed by the central government. That all became a big festival of democracy. That festival has been breaking up over time. They're called the unified local elections, but as we'll see in a later slide, the term unified has been strained beyond the breaking point. Now, the first round of elections this last week had 9 governorships up for election, and the election of a set of mayoral elections in major cities, not including Tokyo. The next set of and prefectural elections in 41 of Japan's 47 prefectures. So prefectural assemblies were chosen. When on April the 23rd, there will be more local elections, including where I live here in Setagaya City. There will be the city assembly that will be selected. And at the same time, there will be the by-elections for the House of Representatives. Now, one of the major outcomes of this particular set of local elections nationwide is the rise of a party that has heretofore been basically an Osaka area party, and that is the party called Ishin, or Nihon no Ishin, or Osaka no Ishin. It gives itself various translations, including restoration and rise. Basically, this is a party that previously was only in the Osaka area and was concentrated on issues having to do with Osaka. And indeed, its dominance in that area was demonstrated by its winning handily and easily both the governorship of Osaka Prefecture, and also the city of Osaka itself. And then we have the 2 victors here on the left, including the head of the party, Mr. Yoshimura. They managed, however, in this election to seize another governorship immediately next door in Nara Prefecture, a bastion of the Liberal Democratic Party, the LDP, the party that dominates Japanese politics. And by having a second governorship under their control, people are now talking about Ishin as developing finally into a national party. It has representatives from all over the country inside the House of Reps. It has assembly seats all over in both local and prefectural assemblies all over the country. But in the last set of elections, it doubled the number of prefectural seats that it had nationwide. The only party to really show a major shift upward, and it won seats all over the country. The reason why this is important is because Japan has a very weak opposition to the LDP. The LDP is a super dominant party and has dominated Japanese politics since 1955. And a series of would-be challengers have risen and fallen over the many decades. And here, what we're seeing is possibly the rise of a new challenger in terms, but one that will be, unlike most parties that challenge the LDP, which are idealistic and left, one that is somewhat more to the right and somewhat very, very nationalistic and boisterous at times, which is odd because it's a regional party. But in trying to appeal to a broader base and to a broader national audience, they've been talking about dominating the entire country. Here in Setagaya, or here in the Tokyo 23 wards that will be having their elections on the 23rd, they are by far the most visible campaigners right now. They're pushing very hard, and they are pressing, saying we are the alternative to the LDP, not the other opposition parties in Japan. And the CDPJ, the main opposition party, the Constitutional Democratic Party of Japan, is rather concerned about the popularity of this party, which appeals, as you might be able to tell from the way they're dressed, to the 25% or so of Japanese we class called the new middle class, white collar workers in big and middle-sized businesses. These are the kind of folks that this party tries to attract and seems to be attracting right now. Another big story from the local elections is improvement in the representation or the participation in politics of women on the local level. City and prefectural assemblies have been dominated by men, or in many cases, absolutely monopolized by men. There is what is called the 0-1 phenomenon, which is that there is a large percentage of city assemblies which have either 0 or 1, only one woman member. That's something around 35% of all city assemblies and township and village assemblies. That number is an embarrassment, and there has been a significant attempt to entice women to run. In this last late weekend's election, we had 489 women candidates running for prefectural assembly seats and 316 winning seats or earning seats, and that's 14% of the total, which is a record. Again, as compared to most nations around the world, 14% is very low. Nevertheless, it is an improvement over the past, and one has to applaud it for what it may be. Now, in terms of parties, how many of their winning candidates, or what percentage of their winning candidates were women, the following slide shows that the LDP, the traditional dominant party, is in an embarrassing position in terms of the number of its winners, or the percentage of its winners that were women, with only 5.9% of the candidates that ran and won seats under the LDP flag. It's way below all of the other parties. whereas the opposition parties, CDPJ, DPP, JCP, the Constitutional Democratic Party of Japan, the Democratic Party of the People, the Japan Communist Party, with its very high, more than half of its winners were women, are women, and even the very stylish ultra right-wing party Sanseito, half of its candidates that won seats are women. So the LDP, the majority party, is in an embarrassing position in local politics, even worse than it is in national politics, where it is already is strongly male dominated. Nevertheless, one has to say that there is progress. There is steady progress in getting women elected. Now, these are called the unified local elections, but only a small fraction of the total number of local elections that take place in Japan are actually being held at this time. It would be great for opposition parties if they could concentrate on one day out of the year, or one day every 4 years, to do all of their campaigning. It's much better for the incumbent LDP, however, for there to be elections all over the calendar at whatever time, every Sunday, an election somewhere. And indeed, that is the way that it has spread. So that in the unified local elections, which used to be truly unified, only less than 28% of the total number of local available seats were actually being contested on that, which means that the elections for all the others are held whenever. There is literally an election going on every weekend somewhere in Japan, and this is very much in favor of the incumbent, whoever is running. Furthermore, there is in local politics in Japan a very disturbing trend that has been going on for quite some time, which is uncontested elections. And even on the prefectural level, one step down from the national level, the number of seats, the percentage of seats that were simply handed to the person who decided to run, that is, this person went to the registry, put down her name, paid the deposit. You have to pay a deposit to run for an office in Japan. You have to pay a large cash amount, which is refunded to you if you get 5% of the vote. This is how you keep weird fringe candidates from running or spending a lot of money if they want to run. But then nobody else turns up at the registry and you get the seat and there's no election and you get your money back. That happened a disturbing percentage of the time this election. 25% of the seats that were up for grabs in all the prefectures, in the 41 prefectures, 1/4 of them, exactly 565 out of 2,260 seats, were simply given to the person who showed up. And that's not a lively democracy. If there's no contestation, if there's no competition, you have some fears there. This is on the prefecture level. The situation is even worse on the local level. What I have, the image here is of the elections committee in a particular municipality, which has not had an election in over the last 5 cycles. Simply, all of the seats in the city assembly were filled by persons who showed up and registered their names, and no election was held. So you only need an elections committee with a single person to pin the badges on the winners, which is what he has in front of him, are the badges for the winners. If there's any positive out of the fact that we have these uncontested elections, where there is a single candidate, and because there's a single candidate, you don't have to there's no campaign spending, there's no election spending, there are no election observers, all of it's for free. I mean, that's good, but it makes democracy look kind of silly. If there's only the one good message that came out of this election, was that this is actually down from the percentage that were simply handed over to candidates in 2019. So there's been an improvement in actually in the Democratic contestation of seats. Let's hope that continues. One of the things that has to happen is having more women run. And if they run, this percentage will probably go down. I was speaking about the by-elections. There are 4 Diet seats. Yamaguchi number 2, the former seat of wait 1 second. The former seat of the former Minister of Defense, Kishi Nobuo, which is being contested by his son, and might actually be lost by his son, and that would be a dishonor to the Kishi family because he's running against a fellow conservative. There's a 2-person race there. Then Yamaguchi number 4, which was Shinzo Abe's seat, which was vacated by his assassination. That will be contested by 5 candidates, but the LDP supported candidate is supposed to win that easily. The same is true for the LDP candidate in the Wakayama number 1 seat, which was vacated by a man who wanted to run for the governorship of Wakayama Prefecture. But it's the Chiba number 5 seat, which was vacated by a scandal-plagued LDP member, which has this large number of candidates. All of them are newcomers. And as you can see, more than half of the candidates are women. This is the bellwether right now of looking at how politics is going. How this sorts out, the LDP candidate is the one on the far left, who actually has a non-Japanese surname. This is a highly watched race. And indeed, if the LDP prevails in this Chiba number 5 and sweeps all 4 seats, the general wisdom is that Prime Minister Kishida will call an election. Not immediately. He has to first host the world leaders at the G7 summit in May, and he hopes to get a little bit of international statesman shine out of that. But soon after that, even before the end of the diet session that is currently ongoing, there is a feeling that why not strike right now? Now, there is a question about his personal popularity leading the nation into an election. Here is the red line is the popularity rating as measured by NHK, saying that there's his cabinet is supported by about 35, 36, 37% of the population. Other polls have him much higher, but nevertheless, is this a good time to have an election for him is a question. Nevertheless, if indeed the Chiba 5 election goes the LDP's way, we can expect, unless something strange happens in May, to have a general election, a House of Representatives election this year. Why not strike before Kishida's popularity goes down, at least in Kishida's point of view? Now, if Kishida decides to ask for an election, he will have a major calculation in making that decision. With the death of Shinzo Abe, who was very much the great banyan tree of Japanese politics, under which nothing else could grow for so long, Abe is gone, and Kishida can establish himself as truly as the leader of the party if he leads the party in victory. So the temptation is there for him to call an election as soon as possible. That's all I have to say, and I throw open the floor to your questions.
Thank you, Professor Cucek. You can feel free to leave your screen open if you want to refer
Or
back to.
I can stop share too, so that we can just talk.
All right. Well, thank you. That was really interesting. I hope everyone got a lot out of it. I wanted to start off by asking maybe a basic question, but are there regional divides in Japanese politics? For example, in the US, we consider many parts of the South to be conservative, California liberal. Can we make similar generalizations in Japan?
Absolutely. The northeastern part of the country and Hokkaido were traditionally seen as the bastions of not quite left-wing politics, but at least anti-LDP politics. The LDP has been chewing away at that, and indeed in holding on to the Hokkaido governorship, they have demonstrated that that prefecture, which was previously solidly an opposition prefecture, can be taken over by the LDP. The LDP dominates, absolutely dominates once you go west of Osaka. It's a vast field of red, if you want to put it in that way. It's virtually all LDP representatives, and dominant LDP dominates at every level. But once you leave the Osaka area, which is now dominated by Ishin, you have an enclave in Nagoya of an Aichi prefecture regionalist party. And you have here in Tokyo, the governor of Tokyo, Koike, has her own regionalist party, Tokyo First. There are regional divisions, but the main divide is somewhere around Aichi prefecture. And indeed, the former prime minister from the DPJ, Nodo Yoshihiko, seeing the results of Ishin's advances, has said they're coming over the pass at Hakone and coming into our area. This is they are a terrifying force. There is regionalism, and the fact that he says they're coming over to our place is, he thinks that this belongs to the descendants of the DPJ party. Yeah, very definitely.
Thank you. John in the chat wanted to know what the situation is like in Beppu, if you know.
In where?
Beppu, Oita Prefecture.
I have no idea what's going on in Beppu.
Too specific. That's all right. And then another question. You were talking about when someone chooses to run for office, they have to pay a large amount of money. And that's also something our last speaker brought up as well. Our last speaker said it was about $30,000 maybe.
That's for a House of Representative seats. It's $60,000 to run for House of Councilors.
Okay, yeah, that's a huge amount of money. So are there rules about where the money can come from? Or for example, if you're running as an LD.
There are rules on the kinds of donations that can be made to people. There's rules on how much you can spend personally. All that is highly controlled. It is designed to force people to join parties. It is designed to keep out the indigent from running, and to set up a barrier against the poor running. It's not stated that way. That would be unconstitutional. Nevertheless, Japan does have the highest shotakin, highest deposits in the world to run for office. That's definitely to keep out undesirable candidates, including the very poor.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, I think it was brought up last week in the context of that politician, the YouTuber politician, Gassy.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. That was an interesting story. So another question we have, do you have the turnout rate for the April 9th polls? That comes from Tom.
Yeah, the turnout rate wasn't bad. It was a lot of newspapers decried the fact in the governor's races that the amount went down, but it's around 46%, which is, for considering the powers of local government are relatively limited as compared to national government, that people still show up for the polls. And especially with all of these one-person races, that people aren't demoralized, is really actually quite refreshing. So it's around 46%.
On a similar note, we have Amani. She wants to know, in your opinion, how can the Japanese government encourage higher voter turnout among all people, and then also the youth specifically?
Yeah, that's a big question. Young people vote typically only 1/3 of the time or less. Uh, if they want to leverage their power, that's certainly not the way to do it. Furthermore, young people are also, in the terms of the demographic pyramid of Japan, they are actually the least numerous class of people. So they hit themselves twice that way. It would be great if there were ways to raise the voting rate. That's hard when there aren't a lot of exciting candidates, though there were a lot of rather younger women who were elected in this current set of local elections, which is really encouraging because they tend to drive voting upward, and they tend to be very active in their assemblies and very it's a sign of vitality. There, I would like to say, just as an aside, regarding women in politics, it is a negative indicator when you have few women. It shows that your community is either economically or socially declining or dying. The greater percentage of men that are in your assembly, or whether it's on the prefectural side or on the local side, the greater percentage that's there is really a negative indicator. It says you are behind the times and you're declining. So we're seeing a lot of women running in the areas where Japan is still, where the economy and where the social life is still active. In terms of driving higher overall rates, that's not in the interest of the LDP in general, but we have seen over the last 3 elections, national elections like the House of Representatives election or the House of Councilors election, we have seen a steady rise in voter turnout. That is partly due to an aging population, but also due to the end of, there were vote depressive behaviors that were going on that I don't want to go into for very much. But again, there's a positive story nationwide. Voting rates are going up for the most part.
Yeah, and it's promising to hear about more women in politics. I'm curious what the average age of the House of Representatives is in Japan, if you know off the top of your head.
Oh, I don't know that right now, and I'm sorry I don't. Though it hovers around 56, and that's actually pretty good for national level politics. In terms of the municipal politics, it's somewhere around 64 and above. And that's because there are so many decaying and declining municipalities in Japan that are over where men are way overrepresented and women don't want to run. They feel that they're going into both a hostile environment in many cases, and also one that doesn't pay very well.
Yeah, I think that's a lot younger than the US. 56 is, yeah, it sounds pretty young. You talked a bit about how local elections have become disunified. Was that intentional in some way, or did it happen naturally? That question's from David.
It's intentional neglect. It's allowing for the death of a person in office, or a person resigning, or a person, or in the case of governorships, that the prefectural assembly can have a vote of no confidence against the governor, that there was no mechanism established to say that, okay, if somebody's turned out of office or somebody dies and there's an election to fill the seat, that the next time that they have an election, that it has to be on the date of the unified elections. No mechanism was set up for that. And that's a willful neglect on the part of the LDP, because it was in the LDP's favor. And its predecessors as well.
It seems like voter turnout might be higher if people didn't have to keep track of all these different dates.
Oh, it certainly would be.
Yeah. John wants to know, he says, Koike seemed politically hot not too long ago. Is that all in the past?
Politically hot, meaning that that she can put together a party that could challenge the LDP. No, politically hot in that she can establish a regional party that dominates the Tokyo Prefectural Assembly. No, but she can be governor of Tokyo for. She can die in office. No one will vote against her, and no one substantial will run against her. And she's there. She's a fixture there, and it's very common for governors to run for at least 4 terms. So she's got a few more to go.
Okay, a few more questions like about specific parties. Moeka wants to know how does the rise of Ishin make you feel? What kind of voters are drawn to them? Yeah.
Well, I think there are people who are dressed like me in a white shirt and a tie. They project a certain masculinity in a certain drive. If you visit their website, it's all very active people in suits and looking determined and looking decisive. And it was very strange, actually, during the COVID epidemic. Osaka frequently had the worst infection rates and the greatest death rates, and yet the popularity of the governor of Osaka and the popularity of the mayor of the city of Osaka rose dramatically, just because they took stances and they looked tough and they were decisive, and even if the actual effects were not positive. It's how does it make me feel? It makes me feel that, well, theater works, and their theater right now is to be a more populist version of conservatism than the LDP represents, particularly the LDP under Kishida.
So to clarify, when you were talking about their response to COVID, they were having a heavy hand.
They would Osaka was its policies were all over the map. Sometimes really strict, sometimes very loose, and but the key was that Yoshimura, the head of the party, would just be doing his press conferences and saying that we're doing decisive about this and decisive about that, and that the actual statistics didn't show that any of this mattered, was irrelevant. The popularity was based on the theatrical aspects of it.
Okay. Another question, let's see, about this one's from Gerard. He says, could you give us your analysis of the current degree of the potential capacity for Mr. Kono, Mrs. Takaichi, and Mrs. Noda to challenge Mr. Kishida's leadership within the LDP?
Okay, so in terms of Kono Taro is not terribly popular within the LDP, and he's currently quite well occupied with the digitalization of the Japanese government. Sanae Takaichi is actually being blamed by members of the LDP for the loss of Nara Prefecture. She comes from Nara, and that her troubles in the Diet over things that she said in 2007 and her denial of her interfering in the actions of the bureaucracy back then, which was political theater that occupied the budget committee for months earlier this year. Her grabbing of the spotlight and doing so in a way that looked bad for the LDP is now being given as one of the reasons why the LDP lost control of Nara. She's not anywhere in the picture. Now, as for Noda Seiko, she's an acting LDP Secretary General, I believe. I think that's what her title is now. And she's always going to be there, but She's always had trouble getting at least 20 members of the Diet to sign up for her to be a candidate in the presidential elections of the LDP. And she has a personal story that is troubling and problematic, that will make it very hard for her, even though she has run both against Abe and against Kishida, for her to really ever grab the brass ring and become the first woman president of the LDP and possibly prime minister.
We have a lot of questions about the defense budget. You
Okay, yeah,
you said
fine.
like one little
Let's
thing
talk
about
the defense budget.
Okay, great. Garen is in the chat. He actually was one of our speakers about the JSDF.
Mm.
He says, I would like to take up your point on the increased defense budget. Do you think this has received relatively limited public attention due to the changing regional security pattern or the lack of detail on taxation and debt? He says, public responses appear to be very different from the limited legal reforms of 2015.
Yeah, this is being handled within the Diet rather than being handled out on the street, as was the issues of 2014 and 2015. Those led to street protests, and massive street protests and exciting ones. This time around, that we don't have street protests, but we have catcalls from the opposition about the imaginary numbers that are being tossed about. To give a background for everyone, the defense budget is being raised by 20% from around 5 trillion in the 5 trillion range to the 6 trillion range, going from 5% of the budget to close. It's heading for 8% of the budget. Now, Japan has an aging population, so every year social welfare spending goes up. That part of the budget is expanding. It also has a very large national debt, and that eats up a quarter of the budget just in terms of paying off debt and paying off interest. The amount that remains after you have social welfare spending taken out and the debt solutions, the pie is really small. And for sharing out the different things that government does, including 15% of it goes for actually paying for local government, which local taxes are too low in Japan and they can't pay for themselves. 15% of the national budget goes to giving allocations to local government. What's left for defense to expand into is relatively small. And the question is, where is this money going to come from? And the description that's in the budget that just passed is fanciful. It's farcical. It's make-believe. And the fact that the LDP and its partner, the Komeito, have massive majorities in both houses, and means that these farcical numbers are not really being addressed. But when budget committee meets, or when any other committee meets, there are catcalls from the opposition saying, what are you talking about? You know, what, this is nonsense. But it's not out in the street, that's for sure.
So because of their how secure they are in their power, it's not being questioned as much within the political system, or?
Well, everyone is resigned to the fact that if indeed they go forward with the spending plans that they have, taxes will go up. And that's common knowledge. The LDP doesn't want to have any discussion of that, and manages to not have it become the major issue. If there is an election, it will become an issue. Commentators on the Sunday shows will ask, okay, but really, you know, these figures you're giving, how do they get paid for it? There is a risk for the LDP in that, and especially Prime Minister Kishida. This is but it's necessary spending because, well, an increasingly difficult environment, as they describe it, an increasingly severe security environment. And Japan should be able to provide for greater amounts of its own security, basically because it has been in dependency to the United States for so long.
That Tom had a similar question. He said, would a general election be held before discussions on the defense budget in November? And it sounds like from what you're saying, if the LDP has anything to say, they wouldn't want an election to be held with time to talk about this.
Well, the budget is already passed for this fiscal year, and it was passed by the House of Reps and then in a ceremonial way by the House of Councilors. The discussions of how the budget will be compiled will start in November, and the Ministry of Finance will put together all the figures from all the ministries in December for then that budget to be handed over to the elected officials. Definitely, I think that the LDP would want an election before the fall. I think that the question is whether they really want to run one in July, but that's a possibility. I don't have any other comment than that.
Okay. Steve wants to know which party specifically opposed the increase in defense spending. Is it just the opposition as a whole, or is there a bit more nuance?
There's more nuance to that. Certainly, Ishin and the DPP, the Democratic Party for the People, recognize that there is a real need for increased defense spending, and even the CDPJ. The increase in defense spending, this idea that Japan needs to get its defense spending to the 2% range from the 1% of GDP range it has been to a 2% of GDP range, which is the minimal standard for a NATO member. That we should be paying for our own defense to the extent that members of NATO do, at least being allies of the United States. We should be at that level. That is actually not as controversial as how we get there. If we are going to raise taxes, say so. Don't put it into these very, very strange savings that come from somewhere. That's the debate, and that's the argument. It's not necessarily against the overall drift upward. Well, in this case, leap upward.
Okay, so moving on from the defense spending to a different topic, we have some comments about the marriage equality, LGBT rights. So I'm wondering if you could just give a quick background for those who aren't following that closely.
Okay. There are a number of issues there. There's the overall constitutional issue of the fact that the article that defines marriage in the Constitution defines it as being between two sexes. That was an attempt by the American writers of the Constitution to give women, to empower women. They had no intent to ban effectively and constitutionally same-sex marriage, but that's what came out of the language that is in the article. So the Supreme Court and higher courts have generally followed the fact that the language says two sexes. Both sexes are equal. There is one court in Hokkaido that has accepted the argument of the LGBTQ community that indeed the framers of the Constitution did not have the intent to discriminate against gay people, but to empower women, and therefore the language should not be seen as exclusionary. In terms of LGBTQ issues, they have been very prominent in the Kishida administration because of the gross discriminatory language of one of the prime minister's advisors, special advisor to the prime minister, Arai, who was forced to resign after he said, I would be uncomfortable living next to a same-sex, living in a house next to a same-sex couple. He was immediately removed from his office. And within a very short amount of time, Prime Minister invited activists from across the spectrum to come to the Kante for a very, very public meeting and apology for the language and the attitude. And all of the other special advisors were all lined up there to show that the Kishida administration was all together there, including the human rights advisor, Gen Nakatani, former member of the Ground Self-Defense Forces, who probably took the job thinking he was not going to be talking about the human rights situation in Japan, but in China and in Russia and elsewhere. But there he was too. They were all there to show that what their colleague had said is unacceptable. In terms of the anti-discrimination legislation, it's stuck in the diet and it's not going to be passed this session. Though we had just the other day the presenting of a petition signed by many tens of thousands of people to revive this bill. That's where the issue lies in general. More specifics, I don't want to go into because I don't have the time and I don't know. Because we're getting up close towards 8 o'clock.
Yeah, definitely makes sense. There was one other question about kind of hot button issues. Oh, okay. Praveen wants to know, with the population drop that's happening, you brought up it's kind of beyond what people had anticipated. Is there any indication that with that will come a change in political dynamics to current issues, specifically a change in immigration policy?
Well, the immigration policies are stop and go, and most of the immigration reforms that are done are cosmetic. There are liberalizations that are made, but they affect and expand immigration by maybe a few hundred or hundreds of persons. There has not been a strong push for opening up more than exists right now. One has to be fair, though, and one has to note that the Japanese yen is currently very weak, and earning money in yen and sending it back to other countries is less remunerative than it would have been a few years ago. And that's something that is affecting immigration rates, and is particularly affecting the services industry and small and medium-sized businesses that are absolutely starving for workers. And we're hoping that there would be a flood of workers from overseas, but working in Japan is not that attractive right now. So in terms of reforms, there's not much going on there. In terms of population, there is desperate fear and desperation regarding the falling birth rate, which is falling also faster than expected and calculated. The LDP, and in fact, all East Asian governments have been trying now for 40 years to somehow craft their societies into big environments where it's more fun to have children. And Japan has actually been relatively successful. The number of live births per woman, based on the census figures that just came out, is 1.3. That's way above South Korea, which is at 1.0, or actually I think below 1.0 now. Nevertheless, you need a replacement level of just about 2.1 births per woman to maintain a population at its current size. And given that so many of the persons who live in Japan were born immediately after World War II, that they are dying right now, 1.5 million deaths last year, all countered by 800,000 births, led to this huge population drop. If you think about it, just 750,000 customers gone. And that's going to happen maybe next year as well. If you're thinking about investing in Japan, you have to think, who are going to, what's happening to my customer base? It's evaporating away. And no, immigration is not the countervailing force.
Yeah, and I'm sure the death rate was kind of exacerbated by the COVID pandemic as well.
Though death rates in Japan fell during COVID, actually.
Oh, really? Wow.
because of the fanatical masking from very early on.
Right.
Death rates in the first 2 years went down, and then there was a rebound after, and we also had, it's just a demographic wave that's coming through, that there will be a vast loss in terms of population every year from now on.
One last question. I think we only have time for one more, and I want to
Mm.
keep it on the immigration topic for the last one. Just out of curiosity, what are the voting rights for immigrants, if any? And at what point do you have to become a naturalized citizen?
Very few people become naturalized citizens every year, fewer than 5,000. The foreigners have no, foreign residents and permanent residents have no voting rights at all. That's unlike certain European countries that I've heard. And when the mayor of Musashino City very recently tried to establish voting rights in her city for foreigners, she was drilled out of office. There's not a great deal of enthusiasm for the idea for foreign voting rights, and no major party. The DPJ used to be in favor of it when it existed, but now none of the opposition parties is vociferous about it.
I see. Understood. Well, thank you again, Professor Cucek, for your presentation today. And we had a lot of questions in the chat, so thank you for diligently answering all of them. And we really appreciate you taking time out of your evening to be with us.
Well, thank you for everyone who attended, and thank you all of you who asked questions. I'm sure there are plenty more, and I'm sorry we're not able to do more.
Thank you. And once again, thank you to our program sponsor, the Japan Foundation New York, for making this possible every week. And lastly, I just wanted to take a moment to say that this is my last webinar with YCAPS. It's been a real pleasure to learn about Japan alongside you all each week for our returning audience members. And with that, I just wanted to welcome our new program director, Amani Kidd. So Amani, why don't you introduce yourself and share some of the upcoming events at YCAPS?
Hello, everyone. My name is Amani Kidd. And as Lucy mentioned, I'm going to be taking over as the program director for Getting to Know Japan. So I'm looking forward to moderating and interacting with all of you, and I will do my best. So on to upcoming events. So our next Getting to Know Japan webinar series event will be the Strange Bedfellows, Religion and Politics in Contemporary Japan. It will be next Tuesday, April 18th at 10 a.m. Japan Standard Time. Dr. Levi McLaughlin will be the speaker for this particular event. The next event for the community conversations will be the East Asian Security Environment Challenges for the U.S.-Japan Alliance. This is an in-person event. It will be on Tuesday, April 18th, and it will begin at 17:30 with refreshments, followed by 18:15 with the seminar. And Dr. Ryo Hinata Yamaguchi from the University of Tokyo will be the speaker for this event. So if you are in the Sasebo area, please join us for this in-person event. The next Thursday Getting to Know Japan webinar will be the Political Extremism in Japan. It will be Thursday, April 27th at 1900 Japan Standard Time. Professor Nathaniel Smith will be the speaker for this event. So if there are any events that you are interested in participating in, whether in person or online, please register and find more information at the www.ycaps.org. And the links for the events will also be down in the chat. So we hope you'll join us for those events. And also, thank you so much, Lucy, for all that you do for YCAPS. You will be very much missed. And thank you, everyone, for coming today and joining us for this webinar. Thank you, Professor Cucek, and we hope to see you all next time. Thank you.